2021 was a banner year for Canadian wind and solar generation, and it looks like 2022 is going to continue in the same vein. I'm going to talk to Robert Hornung, who is the president and CEO of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, and see what's coming up for for this year. Welcome to the interview, Robert.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start out with 2021. How did wind and solar fare in Canada?
Well, it was a very positive year. We saw almost a gigawatt of new wind and solar installations installed across the country, about 677 megawatts of wind, about 288 megawatts of solar. And that represents the largest year in terms of new installations since 2015. So that's very positive. Much of that installation has been concentrated in Alberta. About 60% of the total is in Alberta, about 20% is in Saskatchewan. And then scattered throughout the rest of the country. So, but a very positive year, and we believe it's going to be the beginning of an upward trend.
I guess we should point out that Alberta is the only province in Canada that has more of a market-based system. It has independent system operator, which makes it much easier to bring new wind and solar capacity online. Basically, if you're an approved operator, you can put in an application and build the plant and then gain access to the market, the wholesale market, and to the transmission system. Is that, have I got it correct?
Yeah, I mean, Alberta is a unique market in Canada, and it does provide that opportunity for any developer of a renewable energy project to have a range of potential customers that it could sell to, as opposed to a single corporation. And that free and open market has allowed many developers to come in to meet the growing demand for wind and solar energy from corporations seeking either to reduce their own greenhouse gas obligations or for various ESG commitments that they have in place. Alberta has also been the focus of renewable energy development in Canada at this point in time because it's a province that has had a very carbon intensive grid and is now looking to decarbonize that grid with the phase out of coal. And that's opened up also significant new opportunities for renewables in the province.
Now, most of the utilities in Canada are owned, they're provincially owned Crown corporations. And those utilities have not been in a big rush to build wind and solar or to contract for them. But Hydro-Quebec has contracted a few wind projects for this year. Tell us about that. I mean, that seems to be a bit of is it a trend or just a pilot project for the utility?
Well, I mean, we'll start off by saying that, Hydro-Quebec has 4,000 megawatts of wind in place already. So they have been doing a fair bit of work in the past. But in recent years, we've seen in a number of provinces situations where we've had a surplus of electricity, and that has diminished the need to procure new electricity. But as we move forward and take greenhouse gas commitments more seriously, a desire to move to net zero is a desire to electrify the economy, that's creating new opportunities. So Quebec, which has the most advanced electrification strategy in the country, looks ahead and sees, well, we're going to need more power to ensure that we're providing that power to vehicles and industry and buildings. And so they have moved forward. They announced at the end of last year that they would be moving with two new procurements, a 300 megawatt procurement for wind energy, a 480 megawatt procurement for renewable energy, and indicated that those are only the first step in a series of procurements where they feel they'll need at least 1,400 megawatts of wind energy to meet those new power demands associated with their electrification strategy. Across the country, we're starting to see the same sort of situation. Ontario has been in an electricity surplus for an extended period. They now believe that by 2027, they're going to need 1,000 megawatts of new energy to go forward. That's where we feel very confident in the ability of our technologies to compete to provide that. The province of Nova Scotia, which is seeking to move off of coal and to decarbonize their economy, has now announced that they are moving forward with a 300 megawatt procurement for wind energy, and then a subsequent 250 megawatt procurement for renewable energy going forward. So again, we are starting to see this pick up, and these are projects that will not be installed in 2022 or 2023. They'll be installed in future years, but it's starting to lay out the pathway for increased growth throughout the country.
Last year, I interviewed an MIT economist who had done a study, and who the conclusion of the study was that hydro is actually, you increase the value of the electricity generated by hydro when you use it in conjunction with renewables as a storage mechanism. And I wondered about Hydro-Quebec, if that was part of their rationale there. And if in fact you're hearing more conversations with the utilities, the big hydro utilities like BC Hydro, Manitoba Hydro, about that, the idea of storing cheap wind and solar using hydro dams.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a discussion that's occurring everywhere, but it's at different levels of advancement, I would say, in different places. Quebec is by far the most advanced. They have very clearly spoken of wanting to position themselves as the battery of northeastern North America, and envision serving that function vis-a-vis the northeastern United States as well as neighboring provinces. And in fact, we've had the CEO of President and CEO of Hydro-Quebec, Sophie Brochu, has come forward and say they have no intentions to build any new large hydro dams in Quebec. They will expand their renewable capacity by looking to other sources like wind, doing some refurbishment of existing facilities, but really they see that role of being a battery as being a very important one. Manitoba Hydro has been in extensive discussions with Sask Power in Saskatchewan about how Manitoba can use its hydro resources to help facilitate the deployment of renewables in Saskatchewan. So these discussions are starting and moving forward, and Canada, with a hydro base that represents 60% of our total electricity in the country, is very well positioned to use these resources to enable us to maximize the amount of new build going forward that is the lowest cost technology, wind and solar.
What about the implementation in 2021 of other types of storage? Of course, lithium-ion batteries, Redux batteries come to mind. And we're also seeing now Toronto start up HydroStore with its compressed air storage. What can you tell us about the role of storage in 2021 and going forward?
Well, I think the main thing we would say is just that momentum continues to build in terms of the deployment of storage. And of course, a lot of storage at this point in time is focused on batteries and using batteries, and often paired with solar energy, for example, to ensure that you're providing the most reliable product that you can there for the electricity grid. But there are, as you mentioned, other technologies that are coming forward, whether it's compressed air, you talked about gravity storage, you talked about pumped hydro storage, different technologies that are now all actively being pursued in recognition of the fact that when we move forward towards net zero, rely on increased electrification and need for more clean electricity, wanting to do that with the cheapest available electricity in terms of wind and solar, that storage has an important role to play in that. And in fact, the bigger challenge in terms of the deployment of storage right now is not so much a technological challenge, it's a market rule and regulatory challenge in terms of we need to realign our regulations and market rules to enable energy storage to be recognized and valued for the services it can bring to the electricity grid. We've traditionally thought of electricity as there's generator, there's transmission, and there's load. Energy storage actually can serve all three of those functions in essence. And so our existing market frameworks are sort of challenged to figure out how do we fit that in? It's not one of those buckets, it's all of those buckets. The good news is that there's quite a bit of work around underway to try and address that challenge. So in Alberta, 2 years ago, if you looked at the queue for the Alberta Electric System Operator, you would have hardly seen any energy storage in there because no one saw a path forward. Now you see more than 1,000 megawatts of energy storage in the queue because they're starting to get some clarity as to what the rules are going to be to allow them to participate. Ontario has an initiative underway to allow for the deployment of hybrid energy projects to combine renewables and storage as they seek to ensure reliability in the grid as they start to refurbish their nuclear facilities in the province. So momentum is definitely picking up at this point in time, and it's only going to accelerate going forward.
Well, let's talk about 2022, Robert, and maybe 2023. What do you see over the next year or two?
The accelerating trend that we talked about is going to continue. I mentioned earlier we had 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts of wind and solar installed in 2021. Our projection for 2022 is it's going to be 3,000 megawatts, 2,000 of wind, 1,000 of solar, and probably something very similar in 2023. So that's very positive. But we do have to remember to put that into a context and to recognize that when we're looking out to where we want to get to in terms of net zero greenhouse gas emissions, we will actually need to be building at a faster rate wind and solar going forward. CanREA released a vision last year, the Canadian Renewable Energy Association in November, looking out to 2050, where we developed an illustrative scenario that's kind of consistent with all of the net zero work that has been done. We assume that if you want to get to net zero, you'll need to double the size of the electricity grid. You're probably going to want 2/3 of that new electricity to come from wind and solar because that's the most cost-effective source of electricity. That means that we have to expand wind and solar capacity in Canada tenfold over the next 30 years. And it means we actually need to build out wind and solar at a rate of over 5,000 megawatts a year for 30 years to be able to get to that objective. So this year was very positive. We hit a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts. The next 2 years look very good, up to 3,000 megawatts. But we realize that we still have to go faster if we're going to try and get and achieve that net zero goal.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for the update and always appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.